In the remote hollows of the Missouri Ozarks, where the fog clings like breath to the bones of old hills, there once stood a wooden cabin that whispered its own name through the trees. Locals didn't go near it, not even by daylight. They said the ground around it hummed, as if something below was still alive. The year was 1877, a decade after the Civil War, when men still carried ghosts instead of medals. The people here were different. They lived in silence, worked in shadows, and buried their sins beneath thin layers of clay. And in that silence grew a family that would soon become a legend, whispered in disgust, the Crows. Before we dive deeper, tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I want to know how far this story travels. Because tonight, we're digging up something America tried to forget. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear isn't a story. It's a warning. Adeline Crow was a widow. She had once been beautiful, they said, in that hard, unyielding way mountain women could be. Her eyes were sharp, her voice scripture-bound, and her faith twisted around her grief like ivy around a grave. Her husband had died mysteriously years before, crushed beneath a fallen beam in their barn. After his death, Adeline and her twin sons, Jedediah and Hezekiah, vanished deeper into the wilderness, building a cabin on a ridge no one dared climb. The twins grew into something monstrous, nearly 7 feet tall, shoulders broad as oxen, skin pale as the limestone cliffs that guarded their home. Their hair was straw-colored and long, and their eyes held that same unnatural stillness, the kind that made you forget to breathe when they looked at you. They rarely spoke. Except in biblical fragments their mother had carved into their minds since childhood. Obey thy mother, for she is thy keeper. The Lord's blood is our bread. The seed of Eve returns to Eden. The people in nearby Taney County said they never traded, never hunted in groups, and never let anyone come close to their property. Yet once every few months, a stranger's wagon would be seen heading toward Crow Hollow, and never coming back. Still, no one questioned it. In those hills, men didn't ask what they didn't want answered, but everything changed one winter when a hunter passing through noticed something strange. Smoke from the Crow chimney, and in the faint light of dusk, Adeline Crow standing outside her door, visibly pregnant. The rumor spread like wildfire through the hollers. She was nearly 50. Her husband long dead, and no man had been seen near her home in over 15 years. So the question was simple, and yet unbearable to speak aloud. Who had fathered her child? For weeks, whispers turned to mockery, then to silence, because slowly everyone came to the same conclusion. The only men who could have touched her were her own sons, but the story didn't stop there. Sheriff Eli Vance, a weary veteran of the Union Army, received a report from one of Adeline's distant relatives. The man claimed that family honor demanded the sheriff intervene, not for the sake of morality, but for fear. "There's something unholy in that cabin," the cousin had said, "something that calls to the dead." When Vance rode out to the Crow property, he found the path overgrown, the forest unnaturally quiet. Even the birds refused to sing there. The cabin stood crooked, its windows shuttered, a crude wooden cross nailed above the door. Before he could dismount, the twins appeared. They were barefoot, bare-armed despite the cold, standing side by side like mirrors of one another. They said nothing, didn't blink, didn't move. Vance described them later as biblical giants, the kind that walked before the flood. Behind them stood Adeline Crow. Her gray hair hung loose, her thin frame unmistakably carrying the weight of pregnancy. When she spoke, it was with calm authority. "You've come to judge, Sheriff." "The Lord already has." Vance asked about the rumors about the child. She told him the baby had been stillborn, buried on their land, under God's watchful eye. Her voice was steady, her eyes wet with a kind of devotion that made his blood run cold. He wanted to leave, but something in the way her sons watched him, silent, unblinking, made him linger. Their faces didn't show anger, only obedience, like two beasts waiting for their master's next command. That night Vance returned to town with more questions than answers. He told no one what he'd seen, only that the family seemed untouched by time and untouched by shame. But in the weeks that followed, other stories began to crawl out from the shadows. A trapper found strange tracks near Crow Hollow, footprints too large for any man. A preacher claimed he heard singing from the hills at night, hymns layered with 3 perfect voices echoing through the fog. And then the dreams began. People in the valley swore they saw the twins standing at the edge of their fields, watching. Not moving, just watching. When one farmer tried to confront them, his lantern went out mid-step, and when it flickered back to life, the figures were gone. The Crow family no longer seemed human. They had become something else, something that fed on silence, secrecy, and sin, and soon Sheriff Vance would discover that their crimes were not just of flesh, but of faith twisted so violently it tore a hole straight through the soul of the land itself. Sheriff Eli Vance didn't sleep that night. The image of Adeline Crow standing in that dim cabin doorway haunted him like an unfinished prayer. Her eyes were not those of a sinner, but of a believer in something far older and darker than God. He sat by his window until dawn, listening to the cold Missouri wind crawl through the pines. And when morning came, he swore to himself he'd never go back up to Crow Hollow again. But the mountain has a way of calling back those who try to forget it. 2 weeks later, Reverend Joseph Mallory, pastor of the little wooden church in Taneyville, found a sealed envelope on his doorstep. Inside was a note written in uneven handwriting. The mother has given birth again. The blood sings louder this time. Come witness the Lord's new sons. The Reverend rode straight to the sheriff's house, shaking and pale. Vance read the letter 3 times before folding it and tucking it into his pocket. He knew what it meant. The Crows hadn't just survived that storm, they'd multiplied. That same day, he gathered 3 men to accompany him: Reverend Mallory, Deputy Tom Harper, and a local tracker named Abel Riggs. By sunset, they were already halfway up the ridge, moving through the fog as if walking through a dream that wanted to swallow them whole. Halfway there, Riggs stopped. He pointed to something on the ground, large footprints deep in the wet mud. They weren't just big. They were uneven, almost distorted, like whoever made them walked with broken bones. And next to those prints, smaller ones, tiny, barefoot. The Reverend whispered a prayer under his breath. When they reached the clearing, the cabin looked different, larger, as if something had stretched it. There was smoke rising again, but the smell wasn't wood, it was something foul, like meat left too long in the sun. Vance approached first. Knocking on the door, no answer, he called out, "Adeline, it's Sheriff Vance, we just want to talk." The door opened slowly on its own. Inside, the air was thick and humid like a fever. Candles burned in every corner, their wax pooled into shapes that looked almost alive. Symbols had been carved into the walls: crosses, eyes, hands, mouths. Some were filled with blood, and in the center of the room stood Adeline Crow. Her hair was matted, her dress soaked to her knees. She smiled when she saw them, as if expecting guests. "Welcome," she said softly. "You came just in time." Her voice had changed, low, distant, almost masculine. Behind her, 2 massive shapes moved in the shadows. The twins. But now they were shirtless, their pale skin covered in hand-drawn symbols like the walls. They didn't blink or speak. They just breathed. Heavy and in unison, like two beasts chained to the same soul, Adeline gestured to the floor. There lay a small cradle, made of animal bones and cloth. Inside it, something moved. Vance stepped closer, revolver trembling in his hand. What he saw would follow him to his grave. The child wasn't right. It had the body of a newborn, but its limbs were long, and its eyes were open. The Reverend screamed, clutching his Bible, shouting verses into the air that no longer felt holy. Adeline's smile widened. "You see, Sheriff," she whispered, "God has given me sons again, and again. He loves the faithful." Her words were followed by a sound, low, rumbling laughter. It came from the twins. They began to chant, their deep voices blending with the hiss of the candles. The blood returns, the mother redeems, the flesh remembers Eden. Suddenly, every candle in the room went out. Darkness. Then a scream, Deputy Harper's voice cut short by a wet, tearing sound. Something heavy crashed against the floor. The Reverend tried to run, but tripped over the cradle. When his lantern flickered back to life, Harper's body lay split open near the wall. Vance fired blindly into the dark, the gunshots echoing like thunder in a cave. One of the twins grunted, the other laughed. A deep, broken laugh that made the sheriff's knees weaken. He managed to drag the Reverend out of the cabin. Riggs, the tracker, was gone, vanished into the woods. As they stumbled down the path, Vance could hear Adeline's voice fading behind them, singing a hymn. Not to God, not anymore. Hallelujah, my sons have risen. Hallelujah, the world will feed. The sheriff and the preacher didn't stop until they reached the church. They barred the doors, sat in silence, and prayed until morning. But prayer felt like whispering into a grave. The next day, Vance gathered men from the town, 12 in total, armed and furious. They went back up to the cabin, but when they arrived, it was gone, not burned, not destroyed, just gone. The clearing was empty, the ground cold and clean, as if nothing had ever stood there. Only one thing remained, half buried in the dirt, the cradle. Inside it, the sheriff found a lock of gray hair, a broken tooth, and a single word scratched into the wood, reborn. He turned to the others, his voice shaking. "They're still here," he said. "They never left." That night the church bell rang by itself. The villagers woke to see it swaying in the windless dark. On its surface, fresh blood. The next few nights in Taneyville were not nights at all. They were long stretches of dread stitched together by silence. No birds, no crickets, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. The townspeople said it felt like the sky was holding its breath. Sheriff Vance barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Adeline Crow's face glowing in the dark of that cabin, her voice echoing inside his skull. "Hallelujah, my sons have risen." By the third night, he decided to ride out again, alone this time. The Reverend begged him not to, but the sheriff couldn't ignore it. He said it wasn't duty anymore. It was something deeper, like the mountain itself was calling his name. Before leaving, he walked through the silent church and touched the bell rope still wet with dried blood. It smelled faintly of iron and smoke, and as he looked up toward the dark rafters, he could swear he saw something move. Something big. He left before dawn. The forest that day looked wrong. The air was heavy, thick like syrup. Every step his horse took made a sucking sound in the mud, and the deeper he went, the quieter it got. At one point, he passed the place where the Crow cabin had once stood. But instead of empty land, there was now a pond. Black water reflecting nothing, not even the sky. The sheriff dismounted and knelt beside it. Something floated near the edge. It was a piece of wood, carved with the same symbols he'd seen before. Eyes, hands, crosses turned upside down. He touched it, and the water rippled not outward but inward, like the pond was breathing. Then came a voice, soft, feminine. "Sheriff," he froze. The sound came from behind him, but when he turned, no one was there. Then again, closer this time. "Sheriff Vance, you came back." He spun around, revolver ready. Adeline Crowe stood at the tree line, barefoot, wearing a long white gown stained with earth and blood. Her hair hung wet over her shoulders, and her eyes gleamed like glass in the shadows. "You shouldn't have come," she said, stepping closer.
"They're hungry. Where are they?"
Vance asked, his voice trembling despite his gun. She smiled faintly. "Everywhere." The forest behind her began to move, slow, shifting shapes like trees breathing. And then he saw them, the twins, not walking, crawling. Their bodies longer now, their faces twisted, as if they'd grown through pain instead of time. Their skin was marked with deep carvings, symbols, words, wounds. Vance fired 3 shots. The sound barely echoed. One of the twins staggered but didn't fall. The other screamed, a guttural animal sound that shook the ground. Adeline didn't flinch. "You can't kill them," she whispered. "They were born without death." He tried to run. Branches clawed at his coat as he stumbled back toward the trail. The forest felt alive, pulling him deeper instead of letting him go. Every sound behind him was closer. Footsteps, laughter, the low hum of something chanting in a language he couldn't understand. When he finally burst into a clearing, he collapsed near an old oak tree, gasping for breath. And there, carved into the trunk, were words written in blood. "Mother is the beginning. Mother is the end." He looked up and saw the Reverend standing there. "Reverend Mallory?" he gasped. But the Reverend's eyes were wrong. His pupils were gone, his skin gray and tight. In his hands he held a wooden cross turned upside down. "They showed me the truth," the Reverend said calmly. "The flesh must return to its maker." Behind him, the twins appeared again, not crawling now, but standing, taller, towering, their heads almost brushing the low branches above. Vance tried to raise his gun, but his hands wouldn't move. The Reverend's voice filled his head. "Do you feel it, Sheriff? The mother calls. She's inside us all now." The world tilted. The air turned thick with the smell of rot and candle smoke. Somewhere far off, Vance thought he heard a baby crying, or maybe it was laughter. He pulled the trigger one last time. The sound cracked through the forest, and everything went black. When he opened his eyes again, it was night. The stars above him flickered like dying candles. He was lying on the ground near what looked like a shallow grave. His revolver was gone. His horse gone. Something was written in the dirt beside him, fresh with a woman's hand. "We forgive you." Then he saw them. 3 figures on the ridge, Adeline and the twins behind her, watching him, not moving, just watching. She raised her hand slowly, palm outward, like a blessing, and the forest answered. Every tree creaked, every leaf shivered, and from somewhere deep underground came that sound again. The hum, the same hum the townspeople once heard when they said the ground was alive. By morning, the sheriff was found wandering the road back to town. His eyes were blank, his voice gone. When they finally got him to speak weeks later, he said only one thing: she wasn't their mother anymore. By the spring of 1878, the Crowe family had become a whisper again. The cabin was gone, the sheriff half mad, and the woods that once belonged to them were now avoided like a graveyard. But something strange began happening in Taneyville. Animals started disappearing. Horses were found torn open near the waterline. A farmhand swore he saw something, someone, crawling on all fours near the old church bell tower. And every night, just before midnight, the bell would ring once. Only once. People said it was the wind. But the wind doesn't laugh. Sheriff Vance spent his days staring at that bell tower from his window, muttering to himself, "She's not their mother anymore." "And she's something else." His hands trembled constantly. His hair had turned white in just a few weeks. The Reverend, on the other hand, was missing. The church had been locked from the inside since the night the sheriff came back. One evening, a group of men decided to break in. They pried open the door and stepped into the dark. The smell hit them first, something thick and sweet, like spoiled fruit mixed with blood. The pews were gone. The altar was gone. The floor, once solid wood, had been dug up, replaced with dirt. In the middle of it, a hole. A deep black pit, wide enough for a man to fall into. Someone had carved words all around the rim. "The womb opens for those who return." And from that pit, faintly came singing. The men ran back to town. Only one stayed behind. Abel Riggs, the tracker who had vanished in the forest weeks earlier. He watched the others flee, then turned toward the hole. He whispered, "I remember this." Then, without hesitation, he climbed down. Days later, a farmer passing the church saw light flickering inside. Thinking someone had broken in again, he opened the door, only to find the floor completely sealed. No hole, no dirt, just old wood. But when he stepped closer, he heard knocking. From underneath, he dropped his lantern and ran. By morning, the church was burning. No one claimed to see who started the fire, but in the ashes they found something impossible. Footprints. Bare, massive, deep in the scorched ground. And near the bell tower, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside it, a baby, alive, silent, its eyes wide open. Its skin was pale as marble. And across its tiny chest were faint carvings, words, "Mother Reborn." The baby was taken in by a widow named Ruth Haskins, who lived alone on the edge of town. She raised it like her own, named it Elias. But as the years passed, Elias grew strangely fast. Taller than other children, stronger, always quiet, always watching. By the age of 12, he was already over 6 feet tall. By 16, nearly 7, Ruth said he would wake up some nights covered in dirt, mumbling in his sleep about the hollow, about the song beneath the ground. The townsfolk grew afraid. They whispered that Elias wasn't a child at all. He was one of them. A crow. And then one night Ruth vanished. Elias was found in the field the next morning, sitting cross-legged, staring at the horizon. His clothes were torn, his hands muddy. When asked what happened, he only said, "She went back to the ground." The sheriff, old now, broken, was brought to question him. When he looked into the boy's eyes, he fell silent. "Adeline," he whispered. The boy smiled faintly. "She's waiting," he said. "Where?" The sheriff asked. "In the hollow," Elias replied. "Under the bell. She's been calling you." That night, for the first time in 20 years, Sheriff Vance saddled his horse and rode toward the ruins of the church. The moon hung low, red as blood. The charred bell tower still stood, leaning, groaning with every gust of wind. He dismounted, lantern in hand, and walked into the ruins. The ground was cracked, the air thick with dust and ash. But then he saw it under the rubble, a faint light. A small hole glowing faintly gold. He knelt down, touched the edge. It was warm. And then he heard it, her voice, Eli, the same voice that had haunted him for decades. Soft, tender, motherly, "Come home." He dropped the lantern, pulled at the stones with trembling hands. Beneath the surface, he found a narrow tunnel leading into the dark. He hesitated only a moment before crawling inside. The passage grew smaller, tighter, until he was crawling on his belly through dirt and bone. The air reeked of rot and milk. Then suddenly it opened into a chamber. He stood, lantern flickering weakly, and realized he wasn't alone. The walls moved, breathing, covered in pale flesh that glistened like wet wax. Faces pressed against the surface from the inside. Men, women, children, all silent, all watching. In the center of the chamber stood Adeline Crow, unaged, beautiful in the way nightmares are beautiful. Her eyes were black now, her hair moving slowly as if underwater. And behind her stood the twins, taller than ever, their skin stretched, their mouths sewn shut. "Welcome home, Sheriff," she said. "You've been faithful." He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "Do you see now?" She whispered. "We are not cursed. We are chosen. We are the return." She took a step forward. The ground beneath them pulsed like a heartbeat. Every son finds his mother again. Every seed returns to the womb. The sheriff raised his revolver. "You're not her," he said. Adeline smiled. "Then what am I?" He fired once, twice. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. But when the smoke cleared, she was still standing. The bullets had stopped mid-air, hovering inches from her chest. Her smile deepened. "You can't kill what was never born." Outside, the bell tower began to ring. Slow, steady, one toll for each shot. And as the final echo faded, the ground trembled. In the morning, the townsfolk found the church completely gone. Not burned, not destroyed. Just gone. Only the bell remained lying on its side in the dirt. And beneath it, carved into the earth, were words written in blood. "The mother sleeps, the sons watch." Years passed. The story of the Crow family became a whisper, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones around fires in Tannyville. Children were warned never to wander into the hollows, and adults avoided the ruins where the church and the cabin once stood. But legends, especially those born from horror, never truly die. Sheriff Eli Vance lived the rest of his days in silence, muttering to himself about shadows and voices. He never recovered from what he had seen in the hollow beneath the church bell. And when he finally passed, the townspeople said his eyes were wide open, staring past the veil of the world, as if he still saw Adeline Crow and her sons somewhere in the darkness. The present day. A group of documentary filmmakers decided to explore the Missouri Ozarks, drawn by the stories of the Crow family. They arrived in Taneyville, cameras and recording equipment in hand. Determined to uncover the truth behind the decades-old tales, they spoke to the elderly, those who remembered Sheriff Vance and the disappearances. They explored the ruins of the old church bell tower, finding nothing at first, just moss, dirt, and scattered stones. But when night fell, the air grew heavy, and an unnatural chill settled over the forest. One of the crew, a local named Thomas, pointed to a depression in the ground where the church once stood. It wasn't just a hole. It looked like a doorway, and from within it came a faint hum. The hum grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then a figure emerged. Adeline Crow, unchanged by time, walked toward them, her hair cascading like black water over her shoulders. Her eyes were the same glassy black as before, and her smile was both warm and terrifying. Behind her the twins appeared, moving in perfect sync, each step making the ground shiver beneath them. "Welcome," Adeline whispered. "You came to see the truth." Thomas stepped forward, camera trembling in his hands. You're alive." "How?" She laughed softly, a sound that made the air itself vibrate. "Alive, I was never dead. We never die. We only return. Every son of the hollow, every seed planted in sin, returns to the mother." The twins' eyes glowed faintly in the dark, scanning the filmmakers as if weighing their worth. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet shifted. Roots and pale, human-like forms rose from the soil, pressing against the surface, faces frozen in silent screams. The crew screamed, dropping cameras and lights, but the images captured everything. The glowing symbols on the twins' skin, the faint light surrounding Adeline, the writhing forms in the dirt. "You cannot escape," Adeline said, her voice now echoing in all directions at once. "The blood remembers, the flesh returns, and the mother watches." One by one, the filmmakers were lifted off the ground. Not physically, but mentally. They felt their own thoughts pulled toward something deeper, something older, something alive in the hollow below. Thomas, trying to record, stumbled backward and fell into the shallow doorway in the ground. The last thing his camera captured was the face of a newborn child, unnaturally tall for its age, looking directly into the lens, with the same black eyes as the twins, and then darkness. By morning, only one member of the crew returned to town, shaken, silent, unable to speak more than a few words at a time. He described only fragments, a mother taller than fear itself, her sons like shadows stretched beyond human limits, and a hollow that swallowed time, space, and even memory. The locals warned the authorities, but no search party ever returned from the area. Even drones and cameras sent to the site failed to capture anything. The forest seemed to swallow technology, sound and light alike. Some say that if you walk near the Ozark Hollows on a moonless night, you can hear the bell toll once, just once, and then the hum begins. The hum of the hollow, the song of the mother, and the echo of her son, still 7 feet tall, still waiting for the next to return. Adeline Crow, her twins, and the children of the hollow are not gone. They are everywhere and nowhere, watching, waiting, feeding, and if you are listening carefully right now, you might just hear her voice. The mother sleeps, but she never rests. The legend isn't history. It's alive, and it's hungry. The question I leave for you watching this story unfold: how close is your home to a hollow like this? What time is it where you are? Because the next time the bell tolls, you might just hear it too.